The pricing has gotten wild. Basketball should be a really easy and affordable sport to provide, like every single school has a gym, high schools, middle schools, like Europe would dream of facilities like this at all of their schools. This doesn't exist over here. And yet we have a problem allowing like community programs to get access to gyms at accessible rates. I feel as though so many programs, so many trainers are almost like promising things that they maybe can't fulfill sometimes. They'll be like, or they're advertising and it's like, oh, we have like 80% of our players go Division I or get a college scholarship. And, it's like these inflated numbers or, like there's no real structure or oversight in a lot of this stuff. When the games are on, you are not allowed to coach. And so it's like, you have to sit on the sideline and you have to watch and you have to see the things that you want to yell, but you can't actually yell them. But for development, I mean, how incredible is this? Like you don't have players turning to look at a coach. You have players problem solving and figuring things out in real time. And I think that we don't get that anymore because players are always with a team. I mean, honestly, I think that basketball would be maybe even more popular, if there wasn't this barrier. But I do think that there's a big barrier right now to youth sports.
Kim Smith's legendary work ethic is what propelled her from small-town BC to the bright lights of the WNBA and beyond in a professional basketball career. And as accomplished as she is at that sport, she's found something she's even more passionate about: her daughter and her family. Hey there, I'm Scott Rintoul, and this is Better Sports Parents, a podcast dedicated to exactly that, helping you, me, and anyone else out there become a better sports parent. We're asking our children with the activities we enroll them in to get a little bit better each day, each week, each month, and we can do the same through conversations like this so that we can create a positive sporting environment for any child that participates in youth sports. Well, Kim Gaucher, or Kim Smith, as many in Canada will remember her as, is one of the best basketball players the province of BC has ever produced, and you could argue this country as well. A two-time provincial MVP and multiple provincial title winner, Kim took her talents to the University of Utah, where she became the first female player to ever have her number retired by the university. From there, she was a first-round pick in the WNBA, and after spending 3 seasons in that league, she took her talents to Europe, where she went on to a lengthy and accomplished professional career. During that time, she also suited up for Team Canada. In fact, for 20 years, captaining the team for 9 of those seasons and helping it get back to respectability and the Olympic Games for 3 consecutive Olympics during her tenure. Now she is still employed by the sport she loves so much. She's the head of the players unit at FIBA and based in Switzerland. She's also a fairly new mother. She is a wife. And so she comes at this conversation from a number of different angles, including one of coaching, as she coached once her playing days were done. She has a global perspective and one that I'm sure you can relate to here on Better Sports Parents. Kim, thank you very much for doing this and making the time change work from Europe to join me here on Better Sports Parents.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to get on and talk a little bit about this and the time change. But we talk to the grandparents and cousins all the time, so we've got it locked in on the hours at work now.
You know it probably better than most do, and you are just in the infancy of your parenting journey as well. I know you've got a young one. You guys just got back from the swimming pool. You're probably not right into the youth sports environment, but what's it like in those early stages of having your child start to participate in sports?
I mean, it's awesome. I'm a huge believer in, well, team sports first and foremost, I think. I mean, we have her in swimming because that's a really good life skill. She goes to the lake every day in the summer, so it's like we need you to not drown in around water. But yeah, I mean, team sports changed my life. I mean, having one, I was a shy kid. I was a bit introverted, and so being able to have those connections and being able to have an in to make friends was really great. I know it's something that my parents pushed very early for that reason. And I mean, now living in a different country, and, I mean, we just moved here this year and put my daughter in school, and it's one of those things where, you can go on a field of play and you don't really need a language almost. It's like kids just play. And so that's one of the big things that we're gonna continue to push with her, and obviously we have a lot to learn in the youth sports journey, but sports is going to be a big part of her life because of the values that we believe in.
What are those values that you just alluded to, and how do you see them manifesting in sport?
I mean, like, the socialization is a big one. Being able to make friends, being able to meet new people from different areas, not always with the same backgrounds. I think that's really important. It sort of forces you to get out of your circles. And then, since my daughter's only 4 right now, and learning to lose, it's really hard. I mean, you see it, things don't always go your way. And I think we have a tendency, I especially do, where, I'm like, it's way easier if I just let her win, at something, if you're, like, doing anything, if you're doing a race, and my husband will be like, "She can't win all the time," and I'm like, "You're right, she can't," and so, I mean, that's one of the things that I lost a lot. I lost a lot and a lot of games, and I think it teaches you, and I mean, I've seen it transfer into my work environment now, and those will be the 2 biggest ones, I think. I mean, I feel like I could go on for a whole hour podcast on everything that sport can give you, but I think for me, those were the 2 biggest.
Well, your daughter's only 4 now, so she's just about to begin that sports journey. I'm not sure that we need to go all the way back to when you were 4 years old, but let's go back to a young Kim Smith at the time. What are your earliest memories of youth sport?
My earliest memories were my parents enrolled me in dance. I think it was jazz, and I mean, I hated it. Like, I remember trying to be like, "I will clean the house instead of having to go to jazz," and then my parents wanted to sign me up for more, and I was so reluctant, and they were like, "Listen." And my parents were, like, firm believers in once you start something, you cannot quit. So, like, I could not quit jazz. Like, I had to put it in and finish it, and they were like, "Listen, we're signing you up for soccer." And I was like, "No." And they're like, if you hate it, you can quit. Like, this is the one time, like, this is the exception, but, like, we gotta find something for you, you know? And they signed me up, and soccer was probably the first sport that, like, I absolutely loved. And, a big part of that was I had an incredible coach, like, he just brought a lot of joy, he brought a lot of passion, he was a great instructor, he made it fun, and, that was kind of the first sport that I really fell in love with. Obviously, we had a basketball hoop in the backyard. I had an older sister, she played all kinds of sports, so I would chase her around. We'd play basketball. I would go to her practices, you know, all of her games and run out on the court and shoot and try to emulate everything she did. Played played baseball, softball, ran a lot, but I mean the biggest one young in my career was probably soccer. That was what really like turned me on to I want to do every sport.
I love how you said that your coach brought joy and he made it fun. It might be difficult to describe because you were so young at the time, but can you remember what that looked like in terms of tangible action? Because I believe that's why most parents bring their kids into sport. It changes relatively quickly for some of them, but what did that look like for you, or what do you remember about that?
It's a great question. I mean, practices were, a lot of games, and even I remember, like, stretching. And I remember after the first practice going home, and it was just, like, a simple, like, quad stretch, and he was, like, having us make, like, goofy faces, and then, "Can you jump on one leg while you're stretching your quad?" And, like, everything was turned into some sorta, like, game or some sort of challenge, and it just sort of brought out this competitive drive inside and, this, like, inert, "How do I try to get better?" And, it's funny, he actually to juggle a soccer ball, he was always like, "Oh, like, work on the skills, work on this." And I was always somebody that was very, very driven, and so he was like, "Oh, the skills are super important in soccer." And I got to the point where I could only do it on my knees, but I juggled it 1,000 times, over 1,000 times just on my knees, because I'm telling you, I would take this soccer ball everywhere, and I was just like, "I've gotta get really good at juggling. I've gotta get really good at juggling." And it was just like yeah, did it over 1,000 times because he was like, "Well, this can be a lot of fun," And it was just like, "Oh, it can." I probably shoulda used, like, other body parts. When you see people juggle now, you're like, they use all of the things, and it was just like but I was, like, on my knees. I was like, "I've got this," and would just drill it. And it was just like he made things like that cool and fun and, like "Oh, you should work hard at this because, then you're gonna get better and you're gonna see improvement." And he always pointed out the improvements that he saw, and so you were kinda like, "Oh, well, that's cool, like, I see that now too, I got better, and that was because I put the work in."
Well, there are a couple of things that stand out. One is the positive reinforcement that kept you coming back and the challenge that you obviously took on your own, but also you were doing this outside of structure. This was something you were taking with you wherever you went. And it feels as though now so much of it is done in a structured environment when it comes to youth sports. I get the sense, just based on what you said, that you were playing a lot of pickup and a lot of creative games when you were growing up. Was that in fact the case?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my childhood was spent outside in the cul-de-sac with by myself or with friends, like, it was 1 kid could join, 2 kids, however many, or some days you were just out there by yourself, but, we had a big yard, we had a hoop, we had, like you could practice pitching. My dad had set up, like, a place to, like, practice pitching and, there's room for balls, and you could always come up with a game, which is something that yeah, I think has maybe been a little bit lost, is that just going out and playing pickup and finding friends and finding people to create a game with, and I think that everything is so structured now, and we've sort of moved away from that.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. And part of the learning that comes with what you just described is that kids have to figure it out on their own. You might not have balanced numbers, you might not have balanced ages or skill levels. So you've got to try to figure out what you all think is fair and you all think is fun. Because if you don't, people are going to leave. And yet, when we get in a structured environment, we get so constrained with, well, we can't have anything outside of these ages, or we can't have anybody who's this height because it's unfair. We have a lot of determinants as adults as to what's fair. But if you let kids figure it out on their own, I find, and I'm not sure if you see this as well, they do just fine.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you can put teenagers with young kids and they'll find a way to, play game and have fun and include everybody, and it's almost like we adults ruin it sometimes.
I would say all times. In my own personal opinion, I always find that when a child doesn't have a good sporting experience, you can tie it back to an adult somewhere, somehow. That's my own personal opinion. I want to talk about the most important adults in your life when you were growing up, your parents. You said that they stressed commitment, and that's a through line that I find with a lot of high level athletes or coaches is that commitment was a foundational piece. What else did your parents stress about sports when they were putting you in them as a kid?
I think they always talked about hard work, and one of the biggest things was it was really modeled. My parents ran a small grocery store all growing up, and so, that looked like them putting in hours that when an employee was stealing money, it was like they were watching back video feeds at night. If the alarm bells went off and they got a call from security, it was like the whole family would go to the store, in the middle of the night. And it was just, like you saw the grind of what it was to run something like that. And you saw the work that they put in. And when they saw that we were passionate about something and working hard, they were like, they would rebound for us. Like my dad would be out there. It was like he saw that I liked playing basketball on the driveway, and it's like he installed a light so that, in the winter when it started to get dark at 5 o'clock, he's like, "Well, yeah, you can still play basketball for another hour." And so it looked like things like that. I remember in high school, we lived it's almost embarrassing now to admit, but we lived probably like a 6-minute walk away from the high school. And, I used to go every single day before school to shoot, and my parents would drive me to the school, and they were always like, "You know what? Listen, like, if it's dark, it's raining, and you're waking up at, like, 6 a.m. and you wanna go to school to, like, shoot?" They were like, "Yeah, we'll drop you off," you know? Like, it's not a big deal to us. Again, it's a little bit embarrassing now to admit because now I look back and I'm like, "You couldn't have walked to that, Kim? Like, come on." But they were always willing to, when they saw that you were passionate about something, and they were like, we're all on board." So I think they talked about it, but most importantly, they lived it in what they did every day, and you saw that.
It's such a beautiful example that you just laid out of support as opposed to directing from parents. And quite often in today's sporting environment, I think we do see children who have been directed there by their parents. Hey, we all have to be the facilitator when they're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old of of entering our children into sport, but then your parents let you lead them, Kim. And I think that's a really important distinction for parents out there to listen to. You talked about basketball being the thing that brought you to school early in the mornings. When did it change from soccer and all of those other sports you referenced earlier to basketball being your true passion? And what was it about the game that pulled you in?
I mean, I feel like I have to credit my older sister in this one because she started to get really passionate about basketball, and I mean, she was, my role model growing up. I wanted to be just like her. I wanted to do everything that she did. And so when she started to get more serious, when she started, like she was the one that first started going to the gym before school started to shoot, and I was like, "Oh, that's cool." And then, she started talking about like she's 3 years older and she's like, "Oh, I wanna go to university and, I have these kinds of dreams." And I was kinda like, "Wow, okay, cool, like, I do too now," you know? And so it was when I was going into grade 9, the grocery store that I talked about that my parents owned was in Mission, and, we were living in Abbotsford and we made the move to Mission. And obviously, that was home of Bruce Langford and the incredible coaches at Heritage Park, and that was sort of when soccer took a back seat and basketball kind of became number 1. I went to high school first in grade 8 in Abbotsford, and I had another great coach in Frank Chan, and he would open up the gym, and he was very into basketball, and my older sister's in grade 11, and she's talking about going to university to play basketball, and so that mindset kinda started to shift to where I was sort of like, I kinda like basketball more now. Was still playing soccer, and then when we made the move to Mission, I was sorta, like, all in on basketball, you know? I mean, again, surrounded by incredible coaches and highly successful basketball teammates, and it kinda became a natural fit.
Now, did you drop all sports entirely at that point, or it's just that basketball was clearly number one and the others were more in a recreational capacity? Because you're talking around 14, 15 years old.
Yeah, so I ran cross country and I played volleyball. I ran cross country all throughout high school, like, I always loved to run. That was always like, cardio was always one of my passions. I actually got told when I was in the WNBA that I was maybe doing a little bit too much, like, slow, long distance running. They're like, "You need to, like, work your other energy systems. You have this one down." But, yeah, so that was always a passion of mine, and then volleyball, I always really liked, but probably I think it was grade 10, I think I stopped volleyball, and switched to basketball. Yeah, so I'm still I'm a big believer in multi-sports, and I still am like, you should do as many sports as you can, while also recognizing that, yeah, at grade 10, I was kinda like, I just wanna run cross country and hoop, and, like, I mean, I wanted to hoop every single day, it wasn't all structured, like, a lot of it you can't have practices, all year round, but I wanted to be in the gym all year round playing basketball, and that's kind of what I started to do in grade 10.
You mentioned that you're a big believer in multi-sport and play as many as you can, and I'm going to infer for as long as you can before the scheduling makes it nearly impossible. How do you believe that those other sports ultimately contributed to you being a successful basketball player who would go on to play professionally?
I think it's just the other skills that you pick up in the other sports, it's being able to switch off, like, the muscles that you're using in one sport and picking them up in different sports, whether it's, like, the foot speed and quickness that you get in soccer, whether it's a hand-eye coordination that I got from playing softball. It's all of these little things that you pick up that it's so interesting that, you know, you miss out on if you just do one sport, and I think now a lot of what you're seeing is a rise in injuries because people are just playing the one sport, like, you're not stressing other muscles, everything is getting repetitive, and it's getting repetitive at a really young age, I mean, I had an incredibly long career and, yes, I had, like, some ankles and foot issues, but, like, I never had a knee surgery. I never had, like, any major knee problems throughout my career, and I really attribute that to when I was younger, you know, doing all kinds of different things, and, I think that really helped my body in the long term.
When you look at the youth sports landscape today, and maybe we can focus on basketball a little bit because it's become such a big participant sport in Canada specifically now. And Jumpstart just released their most recent report that talked about the cost and participation in youth sport, the cost and the value of participation in sport, and basketball is now third in terms of participation in Canada, which is a great rise. When you look at how basketball is now compared to how it is then, what are the major differences you see for youth development?
Well, this is the tough one, because obviously it's awesome that more kids are playing right now at the youth level basketball. At the same time, like, I think it's really difficult to find a gym in Canada. I even struggled that when I was older, and I think the pricing has gotten wild. Basketball should be a really easy and affordable sport to provide, like, every single school has a gym, high schools, middle schools, like, Europe would dream of facilities like this at all of their schools. This doesn't exist over here, and yet we have a problem allowing, like, community programs to get access to gyms at accessible rates, and I think that I mean, honestly, I think that basketball would be maybe even more popular, if there wasn't this barrier, but I do think that there's a big barrier right now to youth sports and basketball in particular. I've seen it firsthand. Even when I tried to get into gyms to work out, I would often go back to Utah during the summers because I struggled to find a gym to play at and to train at, and, I know that there's lots of great youth programs that are trying to get in there, but I think that we could be better in this area and in this space.
I agree with you wholeheartedly, and some of it's access and some of it's cost. To me, anyway, the professionalization of the youth sports environment. That Jumpstart survey that just came out, the report, the value and the cost of participation, two numbers jumped out. One third of Canadian families who responded to the survey report stress about affordability because youth sports are so expensive now. 25% say that they're overwhelmed by the logistics of how many times and how many places they have to get their kids and try to figure it out just for them to be a part of youth sports. I know there's no easy answer and you're not going to solve it with one question, but how do we get to a better place, Kim, with access and affordability?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely not an easy answer. I look at the model over in Europe and where it's very much still community centered and community driven. And so sports, while there is still a fee, it's very much at that youth level where, you know, it's still a big social and community thing. And so there is a gym and it's shared by, everybody. And I think these middle schools and these high schools, they're not always used for the community. And so there's so many different things and programs tugging at them, and, lots of times it goes to the highest bidder, and that's not going to be the people that are trying to provide camps or clinics at lower cost. That's gonna be the people that are making a profit. And then I think this also spurns into playing year round in the sports, and the pressure to keep kids in sports year round is because, you know, the the facilities that pop up, they've got to keep their lights on year round, and so some of them are great, but, they're not gonna tell you to take a couple months off of basketball or off of a sport because they've gotta keep their lights on and they wanna get paid all year round. So, then it turns into this, and so I think it would be great if the schools, could get access, if you could get more access into all of these schools that have it. And again, I'm not in Canada. I've spent very little time in Canada in the last, like, 20 years of my life, really only a couple of years, but I know that when I was there and when I talk to people, it's always that gym access is one of the top things and one of the top issues, and a lot of them are saying that, schools are rented out to other groups. They're not really for community use anymore.
Well, I can attest to that as someone who is on the ground here, and I want to come back to that. But I would love to get a better sense for how youth sports are viewed currently in Europe and the sense you get as your child is entering this environment? And I know you've coached as well while you've been in Europe. What is the general vibe might be the wrong term, but I'll use it. What is the general vibe around youth sports in the communities in which you've lived in Europe?
I mean that it's a youth sport, that it's people don't think that their kids are going pro at the youth level, like, I mean, I just that seems like it's far less common, when you go and watch. I mean, most towns will have a club, and you go out and you pay for the club, like, everybody that plays in the club, parents volunteer in the club, and it's very much, bring the community together, and often it's associated there'll be a pro team there. It's really when you get to in basketball at least, when you get to about 15, 16, if you're good and if you're on that stage and on that track, then you're probably leaving home and, going to, like, a club to I mean, when I was where I was playing in France, we had a really top formation. So, there was a pro team, and then there's the feeder team, where it's high school athletes, like 16 to 20, 16 to 19 range, and they go and they live there year round. Well, not year round, they get their summers off and all of the vacations that come in France, but they train together every day. And, they're more on the professional trajectory, but they're still everything below that is very much that's not really what people are thinking. They're very much thinking, I'm just going out to meet people, to get some exercise. And you talk about affordability, it's still very much affordable. It's everybody can play, and there's space and time.
Well, and one of the things that I have heard about European models compared to what I currently see in Canada is that in a community, you will generally stay with the same club over the youth sports participation cycle that your
There's
children
only one.
are in. Correct. They'll stay with that one, and it won't be jumping around trying to find more playing time here or better coaching there. Everyone appears, again, I know this is from afar, so it's easy to just see the grass is greener, but it appears as though that there is development for everyone and we're all going to move along together as opposed to, well, here are the kids we're trying to promote and here's the dream we're trying to chase. It does feel as though there's more of a team aspect to that development than perhaps we see in some of the Canadian environments. Is that fair to say from this side of the Atlantic?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that as well. I would agree with that. I think I mean, and I'm not sure if you've seen the studies where the percentage of parents that think that their parent player like their children are going professional or, are going Division 1 or, and now with like the advent of NIL money, just like the amount of parents that are willing to pay anything and do anything and really believe. I think that's less over here. I think parents are kind of like, maybe my kid will go pro, but I think that it's not 60% of the parents in the gym aren't like, "Yeah, my kid's really, really good," They're just sorta like, "My kid's having a good time playing a sport," and that's isn't that great? So I do think that the mindset is very different over here.
I want to come back to your youth sports journey in basketball. And we kind of got to the point where you were in grade 10, but it was a very school based team. And that's what basketball was at that time when you were growing up. We know with the club model now that has changed significantly. How important was that, do you think, for your development that it was school based? You had coaches who opened the gym and provided access. How important was that aspect of it as opposed to this very structured outside of school environment that we currently see?
I mean, I'm not I'm not the player I am if I don't have that high school team, and Bruce Langford and Frank Chan and also just the teammates that I had, I mean, I was incredibly lucky to be in that situation with somebody that opened the gym because I think gym access is, I mean, one of the biggest things. And honestly, my big jump was in grade 10 to grade 11. I had dreams of the summer before I had watched the women's national team practice, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like, you can be a professional basketball player." Like, I didn't know this, like, we don't have a professional women's league in Canada. Like, I hadn't been exposed to this, and I was kinda like, "Okay, that's really cool. That's now my dream." And, that that next summer, I got cut from the provincial team. And back then, it was kinda like provincial team or nothing, or it's sorta like you're taking the summer off. And I got cut from the provincial team, and that was when I spent the summer playing pickup with whoever was in the gym, whoever was outside, and working on my own game. And, I mean, I came back the next year, and it was like I got invited into national team camps, and it was sorta like that summer of not having structure was probably the best thing for my game of just, like, committing to putting in the work, committing to becoming a better shooter, and being able to experiment. I mean, we used to have some, like, legendary runs at Heritage Park where, Teresa Gabriel played on the national team, and she would come back, she would bring university athletes back to play pickup on Sundays, and Langford would sit there, and he would make teams, and we would have 3 different courts going, but none of it was like, "You have to run this offense, you have to run this set." It was just like it was just playing. For 2 hours, the gym was open, and you would just play, and I mean, being able to do that kind of stuff was incredible, and, I think back and I'm like, if I got cut from one team and was able to just jump onto another team, what would that look like for me, and I don't think that I'm making the same kind of jump if that's what I'm doing.
Well, for those who are watching or listening and don't know, Mission, British Columbia is a very small town. It's not the big city of Vancouver. Heritage Park is not a private school where kids were recruited to. This is a public school where you had whichever young women were in the class or in grades 11, 10, 11, 12 to choose from. And yes, you had some exceptional athletes and exceptional coaching, but this wasn't a constructed, recruited team. I also wonder in today's environment where we do have a lot of that. We got these travel teams that are constructed and these showcase teams and tournament teams that are put together meticulously based on skill set as opposed to, look, we've got people who want to be here. Some of them are more skilled than others, but everybody has a role to play. I think that's such a valuable lesson for life that we can learn through sport. Do you think that the values you ended up getting out of sport would have materialized the same way if it was more of that constructed environment as opposed to, look, we're going to use what we have and do what we can with it?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's huge. It's also, you know, how do you find common ground and how do you motivate teammates where everybody is, in it for something different? I mean, some of my teammates were not dreaming of moving on to the next level, And so it's like, how do you relate to that? How do you find common ground? How do you come together, at practices? And so, yeah, I think it's huge. I think being able to play in a community, being able to play at a school was very big in my development.
I wish that more of our programs would become school based. I think from an access point of view and from a community point of view, it would be a very good thing because the model with the privatization and professionalization of young sports is running wild a little bit now. I know you've coached a little bit as well. When you look at young players, and I'm not talking as young as your daughter's age, but I'm talking about young players that are coming up. Do you see a difference in the type of athletes we are currently developing as opposed to perhaps the ones that were growing when you were growing?
I mean, there's so much emphasis on one-on-one and individual skill work right now. So, I mean, there's no question that the game is in a really incredible place right now. It's very elevated. Players are super skilled, but I would say that you see not every trainer is built the same, unfortunately, and so you see, kids that are going out and probably spending a lot of money to get a personal trainer to do, 14 dribble moves, and get in their own bag, and I think there's a little bit less emphasis on how do I move without the ball, because that's not as fancy, Can it be an incredible knockdown shooter? Because if you're paying a personal trainer all of this money, they're not just going to have them rebound for you, and learn how to become a great shooter, it's gonna be like, "It's one-on-one, so let's work on your one-on-one moves," and I think a lot of the stuff off of the ball gets lost, and I think you maybe see that in our style of play now as well in Canada, is that it is a lot more individual on the ball. I mean, the skill level is very high, But yeah, I do think that you lose a little bit more of the off the ball stuff.
Well, and Steve Nash actually just talked about this. I saw a great clip of him last week talking about the fact that the development model, and he was talking about the United States, but I think you can apply it to Canada. It's very similar right now with AAU and travel teams and very young age being put together as opposed to that community-based growth that we see in Europe. He is a big proponent of that as opposed to what we're seeing, not from a skill level standpoint, because as you just referenced, we've never had more highly skilled players in whichever sport you want to talk about than we do right now. But the understanding of the game does appear to be lacking in some of the youth teams that we see coming up. Are you seeing that challenge as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think it all goes back to, I coach 3x3, and I think one of the coolest things about 3x3 is I love it for development. It was incredibly difficult to coach in the sense that when the games are on, you are not allowed to coach. And so it's like you have to sit on the sideline and you have to watch and you have to see the things that you wanna yell, but you can't actually yell them. But for development, I mean, how incredible is this? Like, you don't have players turning to look at a coach. You have players problem solving and figuring things out in real time, and I think that we don't get that anymore because players are always with a team. They're always playing AAU, they're always playing with a club team, and so it's like this year round of nobody's going to a park, nobody's just playing pickup anymore, and so can you problem solve? Like, do you know time and score, or are you just relying on your coach all of the time? And I think right now is that players are just so reliant and coaches, I mean, coaching is a really big business right now. Like, some of these coaches, even at the youth level, are making enormous salaries. And so, yeah, they want to control everything, like they need to control everything because that's how they keep making money. And so it's like they're not giving the players like length to just be like, "Hey, go experiment," like maybe you're gonna make the wrong decision, but then next time you'll probably make the right decision. It's like, "No, I'm gonna call a timeout and I'm gonna tell you to stand here and move here and move here." And I think everybody should be playing 3x3 in basketball at a youth level because you don't have that. You're like, let's figure it out?" And I think that's huge, and I wish we did more of that.
Well, and I wish that the rule there is for coaching in 3x3 was what it is for parents at any youth sporting event,
Yes.
is that you can't coach from the stands or from the sidelines because I see it all the time, and I do think it comes out of best intention, Kim. I think people are there, they wanna see their child succeed, so in the moment, they're telling them, "Go down the left wing," or "Pass the ball to Steve," or "Shoot," and they're constantly giving instruction. Well, we want the children to actually develop decision making on the field and learn through trial and error. It's actually counterproductive. What were your parents like when you were playing growing up?
Geez, I don't remember them ever saying anything. I remember my mom was, like, such a positive, like, cheerleader. Sometimes it would make me angry, like, you come up after the game and she'd be like, "Oh, great job," and I'm like, "We played terrible," or like, "I played awful," and it was just always like, but honestly, we didn't talk really about the game. I never once heard them during, I mean, my dad, he played growing up. I mean, he even when there was a teacher strike, he even took over and, like, coached our team a little bit in some games, but, like, was very never heard him from the stands. It was never talked about on a car ride, like, the game wasn't brought up. It was like, listen to music, and if you wanna talk about something, you can talk about something, but it was never like, "What'd you think of the game?" "Break it down for us." Like, they were very hands off with that.
You mentioned controlling everything a couple of minutes ago when you were talking about coaches that they're making a lot of money and with that comes pressure and they want to win to justify their salary and getting new recruits in year after year and getting quote unquote the best kids, whatever we want to define that as. But I do think there's a tendency to overcoach, and that leads to a lack of decision making and a lack of independence that we're actually trying to develop and confidence that we're trying to develop in our children. As a player, how much more did you learn just from in-game experience without being directed as opposed to go here, do this, here's what I say, so do it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's huge. I think there's really big growth when, like I said, like my biggest growth as a player was like in the summers when you just got to play and test out and see what worked and what didn't work. And it's like that feedback that you get live means so much more than, a coach being like, this isn't going to work. It's like you need to learn through trial and error so many times. Even now when I coached, I mean, I was a big believer in like, well, just try it, like maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, but like let's see. And 3x3 was really fun because everything is so new. And so it's not like, people have been thinking this game through for years and years and years. It's kind of like, well, yeah, maybe that'll work and maybe it'll be a disaster. And I was really blessed to be with like four incredibly intelligent women that were like, "Oh, let's try this," It was like, "Cool, let's try this." So that was really fun, to be able to think that, and I think that players really hugely benefit from that when nobody's talking to them, nobody's in their head, and they can just try it out, see what works and what doesn't work, and I mean, they're smart, like if they get blocked 3 times, they're not gonna keep going in? It's sorta like if you're going in for a layup and this one didn't work, it's like, then they try something different, and I veer towards those coaching models now that are very much like, it's not just drill stuff on 0 with a coach, it's like, give them randomized stuff so that they can try to learn through that feedback and not through your voice.
I also believe that coaches can learn a lot in the instance that you rolled out as well, and in that scenario, because when coaches observe instead of constantly shouting instruction, they see which lessons they think they might have taught that aren't coming through and what is actually sticking at that point in time. And I do believe we would have better coaches at every single level if they took more responsibility and accountability for what is not happening on the court or the ice or the pitch. Did you have coaches that were accountable and responsible in that sense, that owned the quote unquote mistakes that were showing up in the game?
Yeah, I mean, I was really lucky with my coaches early in my career. I talked about Bruce Langford and my university coach and Elaine Elliott was outstanding, and I mean, she was somebody that would rarely use her voice during practice. It was like she would watch, she would look, and then she would speak a couple of times. And it was like when she spoke, it was like, that means something, like she saw it all, she took it all in, and then she was like, "Okay, now this is what you need to listen to." And I always took that away as to try to be, like, far more observant than over talking.
Did you ever have the opposite, or were you blessed with great coaches along the way? Did you have coaches that you couldn't connect with or resonate with during the course of your career?
I mean, Scott, I had coaches that I didn't understand a word they were saying. English wasn't a common language, French isn't a common language, and so there's coaches where it was hand gestures and it was I have no idea, and honestly, sometimes that's a blessing because then they might think you're doing a horrible job, but I would have no idea, and so I was just out there playing free and no cares in the world? So, yeah, that's one of the beauties of expanding and playing over in Europe is that there's hand gestures and, yeah, lots of different levels of coaching, I would say, that I've had over my career.
Well, and as you mentioned at the outset of this conversation with your young child now and moving from France to Switzerland and coming back to Canada, is that the common language is play. It's not actual language, and maybe the hand gestures are different, but you have to figure it out through play. What has sport taught you that you will bring into your parenting as you try to help your daughter navigate her youth sports journey?
I mean, I think just keep getting back up. Like you're gonna fail a lot, and I mean, I already feel like it, you already feel like it as a parent. You're like, "Well, that maybe wasn't, like, my best choice," or, like, you just it's constant learning, like, in sport, you just have to be a lifelong learner, and so I think that that will be one of the biggest things that I hope that she takes away is that, like, you can never stop growing, you can never stop learning. One of the incredible things about that I loved about basketball is You're never gonna be perfect, you're never gonna have a game where everything went right. Like, if you watch back film, like, there's still a lot of things that you screwed up on, and it's like, well, that doesn't matter, like, you just need to keep going, and you need to find a way, and you need to be adaptable, and so I would say that, I hope that she grows up with that resiliency, with knowing that, like, one mistake doesn't need to cost you, like, you just keep going.
Your career represents success to a number of people in terms of what sport can bring. You got a scholarship and had an outstanding college career. You played professionally and now work in the sport as well. But there are a lot of different ways that we can define success through sport. For your child, and I know it's a long way away in terms of her youth sport journey, but as a parent, what is success to you through sport?
Having fun and, like, leading an active lifestyle, I think, like, finding passions that keep you active. I think that would be the biggest thing, and listen, like, I'm not saying this is easy, I'm probably gonna have to check myself a lot, just be like, you played at a high level, and it's so easy to put my competitiveness on my daughter, and I feel like I can already feel, sometimes when you're like you see kids on the internet that are, like, doing 2-ball dribbling and they're 3 years old and you're like, "Oh my god, my daughter's behind," like, if I want her to be a basketball player, and then you're like, "No, she's not," like, check yourself, like, you don't even know if she likes basketball. So, I think being able to step away, and knowing that at the end of the day, like, you just want her to be happy and healthy, and so I hope that sport brings her that, like a passion to be active and create some great friends.
Well, you just brought up social media inadvertently there through the course of that answer. And I do think it's a factor that you and I didn't have to deal with, that your daughter, actually, I hope she doesn't have to navigate it because I hope it's run its course by the time she gets to that age. But we're living in that era right now. And I think it is rife with problems, not only for young athletes, but just for young people in general. In your time as a coach and perhaps even as a professional, what impact have you seen social media have on the game itself and perhaps what people are trying to get from the game?
I mean, it's terrifying to me, like, the pressures that now players have to deal with is incredible. Like, what people's DMs look like, like, if I make a mistake or if I have a bad game, back when I played, it was like, you had that, Now it's like everybody knows about it, and so it can feel so amplified and magnified for these young athletes, and I think that the toll on mental health is really frightening and really overwhelming, and, I think there's still a lot to be done in this space to try to protect youth athletes, and, yeah, I mean, I hope it's run its course, but I don't think it will have. I know it's something that even now today in my job, we're working hard to be like, "How can we protect our athletes?" While at the same time also recognizing that social media has been really great for growing the women's game in that it's given athletes a stage and a platform to show what they can do. And maybe at times when traditional media was behind, social media has helped drive incredible growth in the women's game. And I think that goes across a lot of sports. Like you're seeing these women athletes with incredible followings and like really ultra passionate fan bases that are following not because of their teams, but because of who they are and how they present themselves. And so that I see that side of it. That's really cool that it can grow. And, like I love that I can watch games in Canada. I can watch games in Europe. I can watch games in Asia. And it's like like the world has become smaller in that. And so I can see how people are playing and pick up different tricks. And that's really neat. But I mean, I'm absolutely terrified by, having to parent through that and having to support that because I think that it can be really overwhelming. And I think that it's already shown, and all of the detriments to mental health is really scary as a parent.
Well, it certainly is. And I think for any child out there who's trying to navigate their teenage years, this is one of the challenges they have, is that they have this access to anything they want to get. And part of that access comes with comparison. And that can have a lot of negative effects on self esteem, on self worth, on self confidence. Go down the list because there is this constant comparison to everyone on the planet, not just the kids in your class or in your neighborhood, but to everyone. And I think any of us who have grown up understand how difficult a challenge that would be to navigate as a player, even toward the end of your career. Did you have to turn that side of the game off? Did you have to turn social media off because of what that side might bring?
Near the tail end, it started to kind of come in, and I mean, listen, like before Tokyo Olympics, I mean, I use social media to help drive a change and put forward a cause, and I was able to bring my daughter to the Olympics because of it, essentially. It was able to bring the issue to the right people with some pressure. But with that, I mean, some of the comments, some were really incredibly positive. I would say most were really positive, and then there's some that were so negative that it was like I turned my social media over to my sister during the Olympics because I was like, I can't look at this, I can't handle this, and, I had discussions with some of the younger teammates on that team who have, big profiles, big followings, and, I mean, they showed me some of the messages that they get on a daily basis, and I mean, I don't know how you can look at that, and I know there's some tricks, and I know they're trying to use some social media blockers now around big events, but I mean, it's like a daily occurrence, and now with sports betting, it's sliding in and you messed up my parlays and, like, also just safeguarding the game from sports betting, like something as simple as miss one free throw and, now they've got you hooked. I mean, there's so many things that I'm definitely glad that it was only at the tail end of my career that this was coming, and yeah, that's I hope that we can figure out some more help and support for the next generations as they come up.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago, Kim, that one of the benefits of social media has been how it's helped grow the women's game so quickly. And whether it's basketball or hockey or really any other sport right now, women's sports has never been more prevalent, never been more impactful, and never been more resonant with audiences around the planet. I've got two young daughters. I think it's a great thing. I know you've got a young daughter as well, but you will see this obviously through a different lens than I do. Why do you believe that women's sports in general are resonating at a higher level than we've ever seen in the past?
I mean, it's the exposure now, like and that's what social media has been great for is that you went from like begging for coverage to, now you have your own platform. And so the product is there, the personalities are there. And now, I always believe that when people hear somebody's story and they learn who you are and then they watch you, it's like you become fans, and I think that's just what it's shown, and so, yeah, women's sports is booming now because we've given women the chance to share their stories, and to be heard, and, people are drawn to that. People wanna follow that, and, I mean, the product is also, top level, and so people are falling in love with it, which is really cool to see.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. You also mentioned mental health. And when I was growing up, and I can't speak for you, but mental health was rarely a topic of conversation in sports at that time. And usually when it wasn't in a positive light. As an athlete advocate, and with what you're doing at FIBA right now as head of the players unit, I'd love to know what you think parents, coaches, and organizations in youth sports can do to better support children with regards to their mental health.
Yeah, that's tough. It's one of the things that I first started working on here is, developing a mental health continuum where athletes can check in daily and say like where am I and what are the signs and what are the symptoms of like maybe my mental health is slipping a little bit. And having having coaches, having trainers that are all attuned to this and attuned to the athletes so that they know and they see when maybe their mental health is taking a dip, and being able to catch this and being like and talking about it and helping them get back to, you know, hopefully they don't go slide all the way down where, it's like you need to refer them out to counselors, to psychologists, to this kind of stuff, but being able to have the tools to help athletes name kind of what they're feeling, and being able to equip them with things to get them back to optimal mental health. But I mean, in sports, that's going to happen, I mean, I'm sure every athlete can probably tell you where there was times where it was really dark, and they slid down, and so having people recognize that now, and I think it's so great that so many athletes now are talking about this. Um, and I think a lot of, I mean, at high levels now, every team has sports psychologists, has all of this stuff. And so if that can now trickle down to making sure that people know that saying that you're not feeling great is okay, and that you need a little bit of help is normal. And so yeah, I mean, that's something that I've started working with and developing at FIBA so that we have some mental health resources for young athletes and older athletes, and definitely something that I'm pretty passionate about.
Well, it's certainly an area that we all know can improve, and we know the importance of it, but it's something I think sports can really help because I mean, my oldest daughter's getting to an age where, as much as I hate to say it, she's not going to want to talk to me as much for the next number of years because she's on the verge of being a teenager. I know it's coming. It's hard to deal with, but I know it's coming. But as a parent or as a coach, I feel as though all I can do is try to create an environment where she's open to talk to somebody. If it's not me, and I'd love it to be, but if it's not me, then it's someone else, and that she doesn't bottle those things up inside. And whether it's a teammate or another coach or another parent, that's okay as long as that conversation occurs. How do you think coaches and parents can help create that environment? What are some of the things they can do to open up that conversation for children?
I mean, I think talking about it, is the biggest thing that you mentioned. And so coaches and parents, I mean, if you're having a bad day, then you can talk about it and you can name that emotion and what you're feeling. And, like, I mean, we start now with my daughter, like what does that feel like, and like how can you make that feeling get out of your body, and just being able to talk about those emotions from the start. And I think as coaches, there's such an important line of defense against this, if you will, I mean, they're the ones that see these athletes, and there's signs, that on the basketball court, where players are withdrawing a little bit more, like maybe their focus is slipping. And so checking in and not just brushing stuff off or letting it slide a little bit more. It's like that immediate check-in, and maybe it doesn't resonate the first time or two, but, like, making sure that when you see that, that you're keeping an eye out for it, and, you're telling parents to keep an eye out for it, and, you're asking friends to help support. Yeah, like you said, there's lots of improvement that can be done in this area, but hopefully there's been some growth, and I think we'll continue to see that.
There are so many different factors that can affect a person's mental health, but one of them that we know is pressure. And pressure can come from a number of places in your life, especially when you are growing up and things are changing so quickly in your body and your social environment as well. But it seems to me there's more pressure in youth sports than there was when I was growing up, and I'm guessing when you were growing up as well. Did you ever feel pressure in sports that was heaped on by the environment or those around you?
Any pressure that I felt at the youth level was heaped on by me, like it was, a self-desire. But yeah, I wouldn't say that it was really external or anything like that. And I do think that now so many kids are like chasing this ultimate dream of whether it's, getting a scholarship, whether it's getting NIL money. And I think a big piece is what you talked about. Is it that it's so easy to compare now, because you can look and everybody posts their perfect life on social media. And so, like you're looking and it's like, oh, well, they have this, 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 and this, and I don't have that. And so I think that those pressures all can feel like they're kind of caving in when yeah, I mean, it's you could these people might have nothing in common with you, but you see how great they're doing, or how great it looks like they're doing. And so that can feel like a lot of pressure.
Do you feel as though, and I know that it's a different cost structure in Europe, but you referenced the fact that you're very attuned to what's happening in North America right now. Do you feel as though the financial pressure that parents are feeling ends up translating onto their children in these sports?
Oof. I mean, I wanna say I hope not, but, yeah, I mean, people want return on their investments, and so it's like, if I'm spending a couple $1,000 on a personal trainer and then my kid's not doing this stuff, you're gonna be like, "Hey, why aren't you doing this?" And so even if you don't want to, maybe that could feel hard. Yeah, I mean, I think it would come back to that, people want that return on their investment, and, I feel as though so many programs, so many trainers are almost, like, promising things that they maybe can't fulfill sometimes, they'll be like or they're advertising and it's like, "Oh, we have, like, 80% of our players go Division 1 or get a college scholarship," and, it's like these inflated numbers or, like, there's no real structure or oversight in a lot of this stuff, and so if you don't know as a parent and for many parents, like, how would you know, Like, we kinda have the luxury, I mean, I have the luxury of coming from a high sport background, but if I didn't and somebody was telling me that, if I just put in this much money, like, my kid's gonna make this NIL deal and they're gonna go Division 1 and, like, my kid wants that, and you're like, "Oh, okay, then here, here's everything," and then when it's not working out, then, like, as a parent, maybe they start to feel stress and, then the kid feels that, but yeah, I mean, it's like the Wild West, like, everybody is promising everything, everybody has big dreams, and most it's not gonna happen, like, for most people, youth sports is, should just be about, like, having fun and learning and growing and staying active, and I think it's become, like, everybody's trying to get to this elite level, and the reality is that very, very few, lucky few make it.
Well, I was hoping you were going to use that word because I do think it's a dangerous one in today's youth environment. The word elite. I do. I had a recent guest say that he believes it's a very dangerous word because what actually is it when you start comparing outside of your town or your province or your country? What does elite actually mean? And yet we have a lot of organizations, development coaches, promising elite. I don't even think people know what it really is, Kim, but they know they want it, and they know
Yeah.
they wanna be able to tell people that their child is elite. Do you have that same concern that we are overusing and misrepresenting that word in youth sports?
Yeah, now that you say it, I mean, and I would from the time that I was back in Canada, for those 2 years, and I would say yes. Yeah, and I mean, everybody's selling this dream, and everybody is pushing to get to this top, and it's maybe not being done well right now, I would say.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. As we wrap up, I'd love to know, now that you continue to work in sport, but are out of it as a player, what you believe sport has brought you in your life that helps you in adulthood, in parenting, in everything you do on a daily basis.
I mean, friendships would be probably the first one. Like I made some lifelong friends in sport, and that's been incredible. And then the other thing is just, I mean, the resiliency. Like it's not always gonna go your way. You're not always gonna have the good days. But, if you keep working, then things will work out. And then coming from a team sport, just being able to manage different environments, I think is huge, and knowing that it's not always about you, that, you're working for something bigger and a bigger goal, and it takes a lot of people to get to that goal, and you're only a small piece of that, and I think, sometimes it can get really, really selfish, I mean, listen, to get to elite, like, you have to be selfish, but when you're in that team environment, it's not always just about you. And so I think that's helped me now in a corporate environment is recognizing that, there's a lot of different personalities that are merging. There's a lot of different things going on, and everybody has different goals and different departments. And it's like, well, what is the one overarching thing? And, how do you how do you help build and grow doing your small piece?
As you correctly stated, very few people are ever going to achieve a professional or national team level. And even fewer of those are going to enjoy as long a career as you had in both of those capacities. I mean, 20 years with Team Canada is incredible. When you look back at your career, and I can rattle off stats and other people can, or particular buckets you scored, when you look back at what you've done through sport, what are you most proud of now?
Oof. Wow. What am I most proud of? I mean, I think I would say growing the national team. I mean, I started at a time when we didn't qualify for anything. And so being able to be part of a group that failed again and again and again, didn't qualify for worlds and Olympics, but continued to grind and continued to grow and continued to push. I would say that that was the coolest thing, that looking back, it wasn't a single thing. It was that, man, that was like a really resilient group and really relentless group, led by, Allison McNeil, who's absolutely incredible. I would say that.
That's a pretty good one to hang your hat on. And I can say, as a Canadian, we are certainly proud of the work you and your teammates did in representing us because at the end of the day, that's what you want as a fan is to be proud of the team that is representing you. And I can certainly say that about your group, that it was that. I do want to end on a youth sports note, and it's a tough question, but I ask everyone this question. So I will pose it to you as well. When you look at the youth sports environment today, what do you feel is the biggest issue we're currently facing in youth sports?
I would say accountability and oversight almost. So, and this delves into a few different things, I mean, I'll take a look at basketball. You have Canada basketball that's, kind of like the head, and then you've got your provincial basketball associations. But who's running stuff, like if you have a safeguarding complaint, and it's not for lack of trying, like Canada basketball, you see you've got coaching licensing program, but you can coach in a lot of places in Canada without having any kind of coaching license. It's not really regulated, and I know Canada basketball has their verified programs, but not everybody has to be. And so now when you have, a safeguarding complaint, well, it feels like there's not really anybody that's overseeing all of this. And then I think it goes to the same when, you have coaches that just they're not good. And, making false claims, and just bad coaching and, ruining kids' development and not making the game fun and turning them on to other sports. And who's who's watching over that? And it feels like nobody is. And new programs are popping up. I think it would be an interesting experiment, to go to a basketball BC and be like, do you even know how many different programs are running in your province? And I mean, I don't know if they do. Like, I feel like people have gyms and, are starting training programs all over the place. And so, yeah, for me, it's a little bit of like the accountability oversight. And again, I want to say it's not for lack of trying. Like, this is a giant thing to tackle and a really enormously spread out country, with tight resources. But when I look at it, it feels like the Wild West, that anybody can start a program or school or and run with it, and there's not really a lot of regulations behind it.
I agree. And Allison Forsyth pointed this out on the very first episode of this podcast. And I'll just throw this out there as a warning for parents as well. If your child is playing any sport, make sure it's attached to a regulatory body because if there ever is a safe sport complaint, then something can be done about it. And there is actually a regulator behind that. But you're right, there are private coaching academies, there are private coaching offerings that are not attached to that governing body. And that, for Allison, as someone who is educated in this and is a leader globally in this, is a red flag. I want to end on this because you brought up there's bad coaching and there's good coaching. As a parent, how will you evaluate what good coaching looks like for your child?
I mean, it's probably gonna be different if it's in basketball and it's in other sports. I mean, in some sports, it's just gonna be like, "Hey, did she have a good time?" You know? I mean, if I'm watching some of it, like, was she running around or, like, were they just kinda doing a lot of sitting and talking? If it's in basketball, I might be a little bit more critical, you know? But, I mean, I think a big thing is, are they having fun and are they active? Like, I think so much of youth sports is there's a lot of overcoaching, and that it doesn't need to be that. It needs to be kids figuring it out and kids playing, and I think that when I go and watch, hopefully, I see a lot of that.
I hope you do as well. I know you're going to help a lot of parents through the insight and perspective that you've given us here on this particular episode, Kim. I thank you so much for your time and continuing to do what you do. Thank you very much for your service with the game of basketball and for spending time with me here on Better Sports Parents.
Yeah, Scott, thank you so much for having me, and I appreciate the podcast because I feel like I am learning and, yeah, trying to and figure all of this out, so it's been great to have this resource. I've listened to them all, and I'll continue to listen, and hopefully get some good tips, and we'll all try to figure this out together.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you found some tangible takeaways that you can bring with you in your journey to becoming a better sports parent. The best way for you to support this podcast is for you to subscribe, follow, rate, review, and drop us a comment on whichever platform you're watching or listening. And the fastest way for us to grow this podcast and reach more parents out there is for you to share it with your respective networks and to tell people that you see at your youth sporting events when you're there with your children. Big thanks to Lightstock Music and Andre Diaconou for the music on this podcast, which is a production of Toolkit Content. Until next time, happy sports parenting. And remember, have fun out there. That's what it's supposed to be about.